I'm Anthony Seaton, and I'm talking to Professor Raj Bohpal, CBE, who is Emeritus Professor of Public Health in Edinburgh University and has been a fellow of this college since, I think, 2000. Raj, you were born in the Punjab at a time of turmoil, really. Do you remember anything of that?
Anthony, firstly, let me thank you for interviewing me and inviting me to be interviewed. It's a pleasure and an honour. I was born in 1953, which is 6 years after India was divided into India, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. I was born in a town called Moga, which is not far from the current India and Pakistan border. Our town remained within India, and the Muslims that lived in our town, and there were many, migrated out and went to West Pakistan. I was 2 3/4 years of age when my parents landed in Glasgow on Hogmanay, 1955, and my only memory of India is a colour bitter orange, dark bitter orange, reddish colour, which came into my dreams, and I knew that colour had some significance, which I was only going to learn in 1977 when I visited India for the first time and flew from Kabul to Delhi and saw that exact colour on the land as we approached Punjab.
Really?
Otherwise, we arrived in Hogmanay on a bitter cold, very dark night into the Gorbals in Glasgow. My parents had landed in London. The train was absolutely full, and my uncle tells me that the inspector took pity on my mother. She had 2 young children. She was obviously a stranger, just landed from India, and took her and my father and my uncle into first class.
So you have a very good impression of Scotland right from the moment of arrival, or your mother and father did.
They must have been very impressed because they were pretty humble, came from a very humble background, and seeing anything like first class would have been a complete new experience for them.
Yes. Was there any medicine in the family, or was it your own idea?
No. Well, my parents came to this country because they thought their children might get an education or more chances of getting a good education in this country. That was the main motivation. My mother didn't go to school at all, and my father took himself out of school after 4 years.
Really?
He decided for himself that was enough.
Yeah.
So no one had actually completed secondary school in my family until my oldest brother, came to this country, completed his secondary school and went to college and got himself a degree. So that was the first. So my parents' dreams and hopes came true.
Yes.
Some 10 years after their arrival.
Yes. And your father, did he get a job in Glasgow or Scotland?
Well, in those days, in 1955, jobs were very scarce. His English was limited. He had learned a little bit of English in India. So his first job was being a door-to-door salesman. It was very common in those days for the Indian and Pakistani population arriving in Glasgow. Many of them came from a tailoring background. My father himself was a tailor. My grandfather was a master tailor, which meant he was a teacher of tailoring.
Yes.
And had his own little school of tailoring. And so clothing was the thing that we tended to do, and a couple of uncles were already established and had their tailoring businesses. And when my father came, they said, this is the best way to start. You earn yourself some money, because we didn't have any money. Mm-hmm. And in those days, I think being a door-to-door salesman had higher kudos than it has now, because people didn't have their own personal transport. Public transport was limited. People living in the peripheries of the city, they tended, I think, to welcome people who would come to the door with a wide range of wares. So slowly and surely, my father did earn some money, and eventually he set up his own tailoring business. And in fact, we lived in the Gorbals, number 99 Gorbals Cross, which is the main road from Glasgow to Edinburgh and onwards to London in those days, the A8. And we were on that cross. We had a one room, one bedroom, one kitchen, one bedroom home with an outside toilet, as was often the case, a toilet shared with 4 other flats. And in that apartment was where my father started his tailoring business. I still remember it. He'd commandeered the bedroom, put a big table there where he could lay out the cloth. I was about 4 or 5, and he used to ask me to come in and help him to stretch out the cloth on the table. And then he would, I remember him sketching out the patterns of the cloth, cutting it and making it with a machine in the house. And then he would add that to his case, make his own stuff, sell it. And then a few years after that, he opened his first shop. It's called the Moga Trading Company. And then subsequently he had a number of other shops.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so you would go straight to primary school in the Gorbals.
I went to primary school in the Gorbals. I couldn't speak English, very limited English. And my brother, it was only, I was from a family of 5, but only my parents could only afford to bring 2 of us, and 3 children were left behind in India. So it was myself and my older brother. He was 3 years older than me, Jas. He is also a doctor. And I remember him giving me instructions on my first day at school, how I was to behave, what the various rituals were, including what happens when the bell goes, how to speak to your teachers. And he also taught me how to use a knife and fork, because in a traditional Indian household, you eat with your hands and fingers.
Yes.
So I had a lot to learn, but I still remember that day, the first day, to go to Gorbals Primary School and so on.
It's interesting, your father had done the homework necessary to find out how Scottish children were forced to behave in school.
No, my brother.
Oh, your brother.
Yes, my brother took me to school.
Yes.
He was about 8,
So
and I would be about 5.
Yes, so he had forged a path for you.
Yes. My father was very busy, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And my mother, well, she's a traditional Indian woman with very limited English by that time, busy looking after her family. In difficult times, in those days, you had to wash your own clothes. There was no washing machine. Everything had to be done by hand. So she was very busy looking after her family. So it is interesting how an older brother sometimes does have to be in place of a father in
Yes.
Indian society. And my brother took on that role at a very early stage.
Yes. So how did you get on at school with your rough little Glaswegian children around you?
Well, the Gorbals was the biggest slum in Europe at the time. It's a lot of social and economic deprivation. It was a tough place. I remember around about the age of 8, we all wanted to be in a gang. So we were acculturated into wanting to be in a gang. There were a number of gangs, and people would choose, I want to be in that gang when I grow up. And you had to serve your apprenticeship, you had to become tough, and everyone carried a weapon. I know people talk about how people are carrying knives and that sort of thing. In those days, as 8, 9-year-old children, we all carried something, and I carried a chain, someone else would carry a knife, someone else would... These things weren't used a lot, but they were part of your macho image and as a young child. And there was a lot of racism. I mean, nowadays people complain about racism, but in those days it was just overt. I mean, 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, you'd be walking along the street and you would be, someone would hurl some racist invective at you. It just became a part of your life. We didn't spend a lot of time worrying about it. There was no one to complain to anyway. No one was listening. It was just seen as part of life. And so I don't remember ever being bothered by racism personally and internally until I went to university. That was the first time when I really was stung by it. But I'll tell you that later on.
Yes.
But in the Gorbals at that time, it was just part of normal life.
Yes.
So we might be called packies, if I can use that word, that we were, and harder words than that. And in return, we might hurl the epithet whitey or something like that. You know, I mean, there was a time when there was a lot of discrimination and bias between the Protestant and Catholic communities, especially in that part of Glasgow, where it was a strong Protestant ethic. The school was Protestant, and we all had to identify as either Protestant Sikhs. I'm from the Sikh religion. Are you a Protestant Sikh or are you a Catholic Sikh? So it was a rough, tough place. There's no denying it. But there was also a sense of community. I made a lot of friends. My parents made a lot of friends. People just went in and out of each other's houses. It was the way that sometimes slum life is described. The door was open, cups of tea were made. I don't remember any tension or discrimination between different kinds of people who came to our house. My parents would welcome white Scottish people, they would welcome Muslims, they would welcome Hindus. It didn't really matter. Hospitality was hospitality.
Yes.
At the Gorbals Primary School, the class size was about 45. The teachers were very stressed. And I was a very unruly and bad pupil. I feel ashamed of myself after all these years that I was so bad. I don't know what was wrong. Probably a mismatch between my ability to express myself and what my potential was. And that created a lot of tension and difficulties with my teachers, which I'm not going to elaborate. So I wasn't doing well at all academically, and I think the teachers were getting very fed up with me, and I was an unruly, mischievous child.
Yes, well, it's maybe some comfort that Walter Scott took part in gangs when he was a child in Edinburgh. So that sort of thing is sort of natural for children of that age, I think.
I think that's right.
And it's still happens, of course, to some extent, perhaps not quite so badly. But what then was the break? How did you...
The break was that my father's business started to do rather well. And in 1964, he had made the outrageous decision at that time to move into a white middle-class area of Glasgow where there were no other Indians or Pakistanis, Shawlands. And he bought himself a lovely little 5-bedroom red sandstone terrace house, 8 Thorncliffe Gardens, with a garden. And I was now going to Shawlands Primary School at the age of 11, and then I went on to Shawlands Academy, which had become a comprehensive school in the year that I went there, but it still had a lot of the ethos of the sort of grammar school, selected school.
Yes.
So that was a break, and to move from Norfolk Street with its heavy traffic and all the pollution and the difficult living environment to almost what was almost like a countryside environment for me, with greenery and a house with glass and light, and it was amazing. And the school itself, I was transformed, and I have to give credit to my primary school teacher when I went there. And I don't know what it was, but he obviously took a shine to me. And one of my most abiding memories, and for which I'll be ever grateful, was one day when I had got up from my seat to ask him a question, and we were chatting, and another teacher came in, and he introduced me to the other teacher. He faced me facing the teacher, and he said that, oh, this boy is Raj, or Rajinder, that's my full name. He said, this boy is Rajinder, and he is going to go far. And no one had ever given me any praise for anything. Why would they? I was a poor pupil. But he had obviously seen something in me. And so after a couple of years in primary school there, I then went to the secondary school, and I was streamed into the top class, which is called 1LF, so we learned Latin and French. So I was suddenly, I had become a bit of a scholar. Yes. from nowhere, which goes to show the importance of environment and circumstances and mentoring and support. I had not recognized myself as being that kind of person, although I was a bookworm. I'd become a bookworm from the age of 6, but I hadn't seen myself as being, and no one else had seen me as being in any way academic until this break at school, and I was streamed, and then for the rest of my schooling career I was always in the top 5 or so.
I wonder what it was
in
you
the
saw
class.
in you.
I have no idea.
No idea.
Maybe it was politeness or diplomacy, because we were taught a lot about how to speak to your elders at home with
Yes.
a great deal of tact, and we wouldn't speak out of line with them. We would definitely have lots of squabbles and arguments with our own peer group.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know what it was, but
Maybe.
I remember my whole body just went red and hot and flushed, because I recognised he had paid me a very great compliment for no reason I could understand.
How much we owe to our teachers,
Exactly.
especially at that age.
Especially, it's a turning point.
Yes, I think many people have a similar experience. So, well, you then went to take your exams, whatever they were at that time, and did you go into a science stream or?
Yes. Well, in Scotland, Scottish education, as you know, Anthony, we're quite broad.
Yes.
I did do 9 O levels or O grades, and I did 6 hires. And so in addition to the sciences, sort of maths, physics and chemistry, I also did English, French and modern studies.
Dropped the Latin.
Yes, I dropped the Latin after 2 years. I didn't continue it.
Yes.
And indeed, I had become a person who became interested in my studies and had the concentration and focus and the motivation to spend time. I'd been cudgelled and butchered into position by my teachers. They had taught me lessons. Once I remained very unruly. I've never been a person who liked to do anyone else's bidding. I always liked to make up my mind about everything, whether it was a school uniform or what time I arrived at school or whether I did my homework or not. I was a very autonomous young man, always right from a very young age, and that didn't fit in with the school's ethos. So I wouldn't conform with the school uniform. I turned up late at school, and so the deputy head teacher had to call my mother in, poor mother, and give her words. The words she relates is that he said to her, "Raj is very clever, but he's very lazy, and he won't do what he's told." And so she came home, and she said to me, "You're not going out the house until you've done your homework," because that was one of the points of contention. So every day she would say, "Have you done your homework? If you've done it, you can go to the park. If you haven't done it, you're staying here." So my mother had to take on that role, and then a bit more work at making sure I was getting up in time, putting my tie on, which of course I would take off as soon as I left the house. But there were some prickles and that sort of thing. But on the whole, I appreciated my school, and I know my teachers appreciated me, because I contributed to class. I would answer a question. I did do my work, and I think they could see that I had some ability. And when the results came for the hires, everyone was completely astounded. It wasn't like it is now, where everyone seems to get A's. It's amazing how many people get A's. In those days, an A in your hire was very rare.
Yes.
And I got 4 A's and 2 B's. That was almost unknown. And the sense of wonder that how this boy could have got these results, I still remember it. And my uncle, my mother's older brother, when he heard the results, he took £5 out of his wallet. We're talking about 1970. £5 was at least £50, maybe 100. And he took it out of his wallet and said, "Congratulations."
Yes.
It's wondrous.
So
You'd discovered that you were a bright kid, and did you have any idea at that stage what you were going to do with your life? Did you have any ambitions or career advice?
I knew I was going to go to university.
Yes.
I needed to get away from Glasgow. I needed to broaden my horizons, and I knew I was going to go to university.
But my interests were really in politics, philosophy, history, economics. I loved modern studies. I mean, I was good at maths and physics and chemistry, obviously. But if I had chosen my own career, I would become a philosopher. Even now, reading and listening to philosophical ideas gives me a real buzz and an excitement. But my brother wasn't very happy, Jas, the same brother,
Yes.
who took me under his wing. And he said, everything you're interested in, you can do within medicine. But if you do these other subjects, you might not get a job. And then you're stuck. And I listened to him. He was quite enjoying his medical studies. He was in third year. And at the last minute, I applied for medicine. And luckily, Edinburgh University didn't do any interviewing in those days. So on the basis of my head teacher's report, my own personal statement and my exam results, Edinburgh University gave me a place. They only wanted 5 Bs. It seems amazing now. You know, nowadays the requirements are so high, and I obviously easily exceeded their demand. So I arrived in Edinburgh University in 1971 to start my medical studies.
Right. So it wasn't really a sense of vocation, it was taking your brother's advice in the knowledge that you could do anything you wanted, or on
There was
the understanding.
no sense of vocation at all. On the other hand, my feeling was, my brother's doing medicine, so I shouldn't be doing medicine. I should do something else. My older brother was an engineer. I was drawn by the great debates, the great political debates. Apartheid was a live issue. I remember studying the powers of the American president, apartheid, the social structure of society, and being very drawn in by these topics.
Did you go into student politics at all then?
No, I didn't.
You avoided that?
I avoided any kind of political allegiance, but I had become a chess player.
Yes.
So my time when I wasn't studying, which was quite a bit of time, I was playing a lot of chess, and I was competitive. I played for the under-21 team. I played for the under-18 team for Scotland. So I was quite good, and people did want me to spend more time on chess and maybe develop my chess.
Who introduced you to chess then?
Again, my brother Jas.
Your brother,
He
really?
taught me the rules, and then I think next afternoon I was beating him.
Poor elder brother.
So yes, when I came to university here in Edinburgh, 1971, I was 18. I was having a whale of a time. We were partying all the time, meeting up with friends. We spent endless hours discussing the big issues of the day, whether it was the existence of God or how the government was doing, and socialism and capitalism and communism and everything. There was no topic which was not open to debate. We were very open.
And this is with fellow medical students?
Yes,
or?
but fellow medical
Really?
students. But
Really, yes.
I was exposed to a wide range of students from all over the university.
Did
my
you
friends.
stay in university accommodation or stay at home?
Partly, no, I didn't stay at home. Obviously, home was in Glasgow, so
Of course,
I stayed in with a landlord in my first year. Then we rented a flat.
yes.
There's 4 of us from different faculties. Therefore, we had
Yes, I see.
intermingled
Yes.
with people. And then later on, I stayed in various kinds of accommodation from year to year, including some small university halls, Goshen House as it happens in Bramsfield. And then in 1975 I bought my own apartment, and then I could choose who I was going to stay with.
Right.
So that was, university life was absolutely wonderful for me. It was everything I had hoped for in 1971, the first year, the teachers didn't take our studies very seriously. The first year was for settling in, maturing, enjoying, debating, discussing. And the curriculum in first year medicine was not heavy.
Were you doing anatomy in the first
No,
year?
no, it was the old curriculum. 3 years pre-medicine, 3 years, 3 years pre-clinical, 3 years.
Yes.
First year was I didn't have to do physics because I'd got an A, so I did social science in medicine, and then I did chemistry because I had to learn organic chemistry and biology.
Right.
It's a very light curriculum compared with even school.
Yes.
There was a case of plenty of time
but
for
you're
partying.
quite young.
Quite young, 18,
right?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then in second year, of course, we all got a shock. 28 hours of anatomy.
Yes.
Plus
dissecting in those days.
Biochemistry and physiology.
Yes.
And that was very hard work. So that's when we learned what medicine was really all about.
It didn't put you off?
Not at all.
No.
No, I loved it. And so many students were complaining, and they still complain. As a teacher of students, I've learned how much complaining they do. Whereas I loved it. Even the teachers who were not very good teachers, that were very boring, I still appreciated their teaching, and I still tried to learn from them. I think I probably never complained about my studies, whichever subject it was. Some subjects were very hard for me because I don't have a memory that laps up facts. I do learn a subject and I do understand the subject, but learning facts is very difficult for me. Therefore, biochemistry was quite difficult for me with its various cycles and everything, but I just put my head down and just got through.
Yes, and you did a degree in physiology. That was an honours BSc, presumably. Yes.
Yes, it was. It was a wonderful opportunity. I did not shine at medical school. I was a busy young student. I was busy with wine, women, song, and chess.
Okay, we can pass over some.
So I was pretty busy. So I wasn't a SWAT.
You were a typical student.
I was a typical student.
Worked hard when it was necessary. And
the objective was to pass the exams and actually learn something as well. I'm not going to say it was just about swatting up for exams, but I had never had any ambition to win distinctions.
But you picked up a couple of prizes on the way through.
Couple of them, but
do you remember what they were in?
Well, one was a merit in sexually transmitted diseases, which got all my friends laughing endlessly, and then the other one was a distinction in surgery, which several of my friends were very, very jealous of because they wanted to be surgeons and they didn't get a distinction. And I had always said I'd never want to be a surgeon. I got a distinction.
Yeah.
Didn't seem fair.
Well, I'm sure it was just. I'm sure it was just. They were probably playing too much rugby or something. Yes. So you qualified, and you did your house jobs. But I was surprised to see where you did one of your house jobs.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I've been a person where things happen to me. You could call it luck. I think probably it is luck. Maybe it's about listening or just having a network of people. And I was talking to my friend Dr. John Drever, and he said, where are you going for your house jobs? I said, I haven't organised one yet. But he couldn't have been a doctor. We hadn't quite qualified yet. And he said, I'm going to Gibraltar. GMC recognises Gibraltar. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I said, well, I might apply. So he gave me the name and I applied, and they said, yes, we'll take you. So I went to do my medical house job there, which was an amazing experience, Anthony. Everyone should have to do their house job in a place like that, because there were very few doctors, huge responsibilities. We were working 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 most of the time, We had to run the accident emergency department. We had to be on call for the whole hospital, surgical, obs and gynae, everything, medicine. And the nurses were wonderful. They took the bloods, they wrote up the notes if you wanted them to. They accompanied you everywhere. They treated you like a consultant. And UGIS concentrated on the history taking, physical examination and the therapeutic side. I learned so much. I mean, for example, in the accident emergency department, I reduced about 10 dislocated shoulders successfully in 6 months, all on my own.
Right, that's impressive.
And that's the kind of experience you can't get in a normal house job.
Yes, you used to. I mean, we all did that as well. Casualty was part of the on-call duty as well as admitting the patients. But yes, great experience.
Great
What about
experience.
supervision at that time, if any?
There was one
Consultant.
SHO, Dr. Ian MacDonald, GP, just recently retired in Glasgow, and there were no registrars. There was about 4 or 5 consultants, and we knew them all. They knew us. So if there was an obs and gynae problem, I knew I had to phone the obs and gynae consultant. Surgical problem, phone the surgeons. So that's the way it went. Sorry, I said went to do medicine. That was surgery I did there. Surgery. And then, but we did everything. So it was wonderful medical experience, a great way to start a career, in my view. And then I came back to do medicine in the city hospital under Professor David Flenley. That was another experience of his own kind. Suddenly I had an SHO, 3 registrars, a senior registrar, and 4 consultants. So the 2 housemen, I was one of 2, we were at the bottom of the heap, and we got piled with this and that and the other to do. The senior house officer would do a ward round, then the registrars would come and do one, and then the senior registrar, and then the consultants, of course. So we were endlessly driven around the place doing all sorts of tasks, which in itself was a learning experience, but it was very frustrating after the Gibraltar experience because I didn't have to put in a single laboratory result into the case notes in Gibraltar in 6 months, whereas in the city hospital I was probably spending about 2 hours a day looking at the results. Of course, you have to do that. Even in Gibraltar, I had to look at the results and then sticking them into the notes and maybe putting a note into the medical side to say what was found. Anyway, young doctors just have to accept that they are apprentices, they are bottom of the heap, they are going to be put upon, and they are going to have to work very hard. And in both those jobs, it was exactly as junior doctors describe it to be, i.e., you run off your feet, and you wonder how, when you look back on it, you wonder how you survived it, but you do survive it.
Because you're young.
You're young, and you have to do it, and you're learning, and when you come out of it, you are better for it and stronger for it, and the experiences live with me to this day. It wasn't all happy. Dr. Flenley, Professor Flenley, didn't like me very much. I don't know why, but others tell me, this is probably off the record, but others tell me he didn't like anyone very much.
No, that's true, he didn't like me either.
And he did tell me to pull my socks up, doctor, in the middle of a ward round with everyone there. And that was another embarrassing experience in my life. But like many of the embarrassing experiences in my life, I didn't resent it. It was very difficult for me to take, but I was dignified and I learned from it. And I learned that you can raise your game even further, because the thing that bothered him was that I had not phoned the lab at 8:55 in the morning to find out the result of a blood gas that was taken in the middle of the night by me. The ward round was starting at 9, and I'd put all the results into the notes, and I knew everything that had come in. But this had not come in, and he wanted to know why I had not noticed that it hadn't come in and why I had not called the lab. And he pointed out to me that the consultant ward round takes place once a week, and the consultant has to make the decisions based upon the latest information. And I took it to heart. Why should I resent it? And I thought, well, okay, yeah, there are even higher standards that I hadn't dreamt of. So we have to learn from things, and I learned a lot from that experience. And I learned something from him, despite that. I think it was inappropriate. He could have taken me to the side after the ward round and privately explained all this.
Yes,
To be the better way to do it. But
no.
he still taught me a lesson. He would have taught me a lesson if he'd taken me aside, and he taught me a lesson by teaching the lesson publicly. And as I said, I don't really resent it. No, why should I? It's, in my experience, usually your seniors and your teachers, they have your best interests at heart. They might not always express them in the way you would like them to.
Good to have had the two contrasting house jobs.
Yes.
One, the sort of very academic layers and layers of people who are all trying to be one up on the other, giving the house more and more things to do.
Exactly.
I remember that very well.
Yes.
And the other way, you were really doing the practical stuff all the time. So the end of the house jobs looming.
Yes,
Career.
a little bit of a break, and then I wasn't career orientated. I didn't have a sort of, oh, this is my trajectory and I have to do X, Y, Z. No, it's more a case of I had a little break. I was very tired after my second house job, and I needed a bit of a break just to regenerate the enthusiasm. And then I did some accident emergency, which I've always enjoyed, in Airedale General Hospital. And then for a couple of reasons. One is to broaden my knowledge, and the other was because I had met a very beautiful young woman that I was rather keen on. I then wanted to stay in Edinburgh, and then I did general practice for a year. That young woman did become my wife, so
That can be recorded.
Yes. So I was keen to hang around to see if this relationship.
She's
would work.
medical as well.
She's a physiotherapist, and so a year of general practice. But that was a wonderful year. I was with my trainer, Dr. Ian Ross.
Where was that?
In Leith, at the bottom of Leith. Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing about general practice, that whether it's someone with a rash or someone with advanced breast cancer, you're the first port of call. And in addition to all the sore throats, the rashes, the baby clinics, the pregnancy clinics, and all the general stuff in general practice, I also had some amazingly difficult diagnoses in patients that I learned from so much. A person with an old sailor with polymyalgia rheumatica, who I had to treat with steroids urgently. And then a person who had fractured her neck of femur but wouldn't go to hospital. It was obvious, the diagnosis was obvious. It took me 2 or 3 trips to her home to persuade her to go to hospital. On the third day, I think, she agreed, and even although on the first day I made the diagnosis, they got a fractured femur. So just learning that patients don't always do what you want them to do, and how you handle them if that happens. That was another memorable case. I read the literature on the management of myocardial infarction, and the evidence that anyone did any better at hospital compared with home was non-existent. That's the benefit of doing the honours physiology. I could read the scientific literature, and I managed a few patients who were reluctant to go into hospital with MIs at home.
Yes.
Luckily, none of them had, they all, to my knowledge, they all survived. And maybe the most memorable case of all for me was a woman of about 70 who had not attended the practice for some 20 years. When I picked up the case notes, they were very light, and there was nothing in the record for the last 20 years. She came and said she had backache. And the first diagnosis that went into my head was metastatic cancer. Why would that diagnosis come into my head? Sherlock Holmes, there's some clues. I just thought, this is not a woman who's going to be bothering me with backache
Yes.
without a good reason. I examined her back, and then I said, I'm going to have to examine your breasts. So I examined her breasts, and sure enough, there's a lump there. And I said, well, I'm going to have to refer you. And she had breast cancer with metastases. She only survived 6 months.
Yes.
And these are the kind of things that you might think you don't get that in general practice, but you do.
Yes.
And yeah, so one has to learn. You're on your toes.
Well, your generation, which is a bit before mine, did you do general practice surgeries to make a little bit more money when you were a young doctor? Do you remember doing that?
No.
We used to do that.
No.
We did a lot of general practice surgeries because we were paid so poorly, and you got £5 for an evening surgery,
Yeah.
which was enough to take your wife out for a meal.
No, I didn't do
No,
any
you
of
didn't do that, but you did real general practice.
Yeah, I was as a trainee.
And were you thinking of continuing in general practice? No.
No,
No.
I knew it wasn't going to be.
So what was in your head then?
Public health was already in my head,
Really?
right from medical school. I'd done 2 electives. One was in Labrador and Newfoundland in 4th year, and then I did one in India, where I just spent a month in the Department of Community Medicine and a month in the Department of Medicine. It was a deliberate ploy to see what I thought about which direction I'd like to go in. And I came out believing that public health was boring, could be described as boring, but it was incredibly important.
Yes.
So-
Tell me a little bit about the teaching in public health then when you were an undergraduate. Do you remember?
Well, I was in the Asher Institute in
Yes.
Warnder, Parkwood, but I had started my public health education in 1st year with that social science and medicine, which was taught by mostly by public health teachers, and I was introduced to very big issues like inequalities in health,
Yes.
the sick role, and other things. And when I did that course, that took me back to my school days,
Yes.
modern studies, and the kind of things I used to love doing.
Yes.
So I loved that, and there were very big ideas. The teaching was often very boring, and then throughout the course we'd have a bit of teaching in public health, and by and large it was very boring. I remember teachers trying to teach us about the chi-square test, and it wasn't put into a practical context of we have this problem. How do we solve this problem, and how can these tests help you? It was a case of trying to teach you the maths or the stats behind the chi-square test. I mean, I was good at maths, and so it wasn't difficult. It was just not interesting. So I was not fired up by the teaching in public health, but every teacher, including Sir John Brotherston, who came in, when they taught, I immediately recognized that these issues, apart from the chi-square test, were of immense importance to public health,
Yes.
and to medicine and to the health of the people. So I recognized it as being very important. And then when I did my electives, this became very deep in my heart that these issues are of utmost importance. So in Newfoundland, I was working in a place called Northwest River, and the river bisected a very small town. On one side was the white Canadians with their whitewashed bungalows, and on the other side was the Native Canadians. I'm sure I've got the name wrong. There were a couple of tribes there, and they lived in prefabricated huts where there was an open fire in the middle of the hut with an open chimney where the smoke went. And I did some home visits there, and there's smoke everywhere. The smoke was not getting out the chimney properly, and the children would all be there with their snotty noses, stuff coming out of their ears, stunted. The men were, and it's a stereotype, but I saw it with my own eyes, sitting in the doorways with a bottle of beer, and the women are trying to get round about to make their family function. And the kind of diseases I was seeing there, the pneumonias, the otitis media, the sore throat, the cough, was quite different from what I saw over there on the white Canadian side, which was the insomnia, angina, anxiety, etc.
Yeah,
And
yes,
it was all of public health and epidemiology was laid there
yes.
in front of me. And the same in India, where I could see that doctors in the medical wards were really working very hard and trying their absolute best. But when I went out to the village where the Department of Community Medicine was working, I could see they were trying to get people clean water, sewage systems, teaching them about nutrition. And I could see that really there were different levels of work. And the work that suited me and excited me was this second higher level work. So I was pretty keen to do public health from an early age. And I saw these jobs as a sort of prelude to getting the background experience.
Right. Yes. That's interesting because you sound to have been a really enthusiastic young clinical doctor, but your interests lay in prevention, probably
Very much prevention.
rather than cure or complementary.
If I had have cured things, I would have been very interested in cure. But I spent 6 months in Professor Flinley's unit, and in that 6 months, there must have been half a dozen people who came in with lung cancer that we treated,
Yeah.
or chronic bronchitis, who died on my watch in that 6-month period.
Yes.
And I know, of course, I knew then that those people were heavy smokers, and if we could get people to stop smoking, we wouldn't be seeing so much lung cancer.
Mm.
Then I did a year of respiratory medicine with Dr. Gordon Thomas in Abergavenny Hospital, where same situation. But at that time in Scotland and in Wales, people in their 30s were getting heart attacks. I had treated a number of patients in their 30s with heart attacks, heavy smokers, and
Yeah.
I think, what a waste, so even while I think you're right, I was a very enthusiastic clinical doctor. I loved patients. I think patients loved me. Well, they did, because they told me. And I loved them and cared for them with all my heart. And but I didn't like it when they came in with preventable diseases,
No.
especially at
No.
a young age.
And
And
frustrating.
very frustrating.
Mm.
And I decided that I wanted to spend my time to see if I could prevent these kind of things happening.
Just to divert you to Abergavenny, which you mentioned, and Gordon Thomas, I knew. Why did you go there? Was it just a job that came up? This was after the general practice.
General practice, and I wanted to continue I wanted to do my MRCP.
Right.
So I had considered doing my general practice qualifications, but Dr. Ian Ross knew that I didn't want to be a general practitioner, so he didn't encourage me, which probably is sensible. Why do extra exams? So I knew I wanted to do MRCP. I felt that I needed to do it as a sort of prelude to going into public health. So I got myself a job, and it's just opportunities that come up. I was also a great one for traveling, and I loved going to different places. I didn't want to be in the one place all the time. I spent a lot of time in Edinburgh, and Abergavenny sounded like a wonderful place, and it is.
So it is.
And the hospital, it gave me the broad experience. You see, it's like smaller hospitals give you the better experience. And Gordon Thomas seemed to be I think he's probably still alive, an excellent consultant.
Yes, he was very well respected.
And
Interested in chest.
So I went there, and again, it was a case of you do your work in a ward, which is a respiratory medicine ward, but you cover a wide range of wards. So you get the broad experience, even although you're in respiratory medicine.
And you did the MRCP while you were.
I did my part 1 from there, which I passed first time. So I was quite pleased with that.
That's good.
And
yes.
then I gained my training in there and did my clinical. By that time, I'd gone to Birmingham to do infectious and tropical diseases with Professor Alistair Geddes.
Yes.
And from there, I came up to the college to do my clinical exams, oral exams. It's about early in the year in 1982, and passed that as well. So mission accomplished. I still remember when the names of those who had passed were put up on the board, up, and that was
We
the
all
list.
do.
And the sense of achievement was enormous. The sort of
And
growth,
first time, that was unusual.
and to do it from those circumstances in those sort of in a sort of
Yes.
district general hospital.
Yes.
I'm not being taught by the great and the good, but I'm learning on the job and I'm studying. So mission accomplished. By then, I was well into the tropical infectious diseases, and Alistair Geddes, I remember him saying to me, why do you want to go to public health? Don't you think you should be coming into clinical medicine? And I think people were, especially in those days, they were very much wanted. If they saw someone they liked to work with, and maybe they saw someone who was a reasonable clinician, they felt it was a bit of a waste to go into public health. And so a few clinicians did try and steer me away from public health, but my mind was made up. So I thoroughly enjoyed that job, finished it, and then Roma and I went traveling for a year. And then when I came back, I already had a job lined up in Glasgow University. I didn't have it when I went away, but I felt fairly confident I would have one. I went to see Professor Gordon Stewart, and he said, you're just the kind of person we would like to have in public health. And he actually engineered an interview for me. He said, when are you coming back from your travels? I told him. And then there were a number of places, and they held one back. They didn't appoint all the people they wanted to appoint. They kept one place. And then when I came back, an interview panel was set up, and they interviewed me, and they took me into the training program.
I can see why they wanted you.
Yes, well, maybe I think I'm one of those lucky people, Anthony, who I don't have a very high opinion of myself. I never did. With that background. And when people support me, it always came as a very pleasant surprise, because I had no expectations of such levels of support. Yes. And so I was in the Glasgow training program.
Before we go into that, just say a little bit about your travels, because I think you did a lot of climbing and hill walking and serious climbing.
When did that start?
Well, even at school, we would go off. A few friends would go off youth hosteling and climb Ben Lomond or something like that. So we were into the Scottish hills, but nothing serious. But into the countryside. And then Roma and I, university. Well, no, I didn't know her at university. At university, I shared a flat with someone called Dr. Will Tapsfield, whose weekend started on Thursday night and ended on Monday night. He'd be on the Scottish hills. He was very keen, always climbing and rock climbing. And he introduced me to both rock climbing and the big mountains, whether it's snow and all weather walking and scrambling. And I became quite keen, and I introduced Roma. So we did a lot. And anyway, we were both very keen to travel. So we traveled to India. So I wanted to see the land of my birth and the land of her parents' birth. She had been to India many times, but she was born in Rome, hence her name Roma. And we travelled the length and breadth of India. We went to Nepal, went to the Annapurna range, did the Annapurna circle, a big walk, up to about 17,500 feet. Not to the peaks are beyond us. Yeah. And we spent a month in Nepal, then 3 months in Australia and a month in New Zealand, by which time our love for travel was sated, as it were, at least for the moment. And got a lot of clinical experience as well. It's not that I was I had forgotten that I was a doctor. I noticed how many travellers' illnesses there were. All the travellers would talk to each other endlessly and tell each other their sob stories. And then I thought I should collect this information. So I set up a little questionnaire and got about 150 people to fill it out. And learned a lot from that, just from that. And then when I got back, I was in my public health training and analysed the data in the way we were taught. And two papers were published from that, just from that little holiday questionnaire. And I don't think I was a researcher, but I was curious. I was a curious sort of a person. Yes. And then I was systematic as well. If people are telling me things, why don't I just record it instead of just listening? All the people knew I was a doctor, so they wanted to tell me a lot. And then we visited a few hospitals. We would just turn up sometimes and say, we're from the UK and you've got a hospital here, it's infectious diseases, and I'd love to see what's going on. And most of the time people were very hospitable. Yes. And I saw tetanus, a whole ward of babies with tetanus, and things that you don't normally see. So, and then in Australia, I did a month locum as a general practitioner in the bush, which was amazing. I learned all about standards because when I did my first surgery, I was looking for a couch, and I couldn't find one, but I found one where there's a pile of medical journals 3 feet thick covering a whole couch. So I took those journals off, brushed the dust off, and first patient I said, well, we'll need to examine your abdomen. Can you just lie on the couch? He said, oh, I've been in this practice for 30 years and I didn't know there was a couch. I said, well, the next one. I take her out and then...
The doctor doesn't normally ask me to take that.
And then the ophthalmoscope wouldn't work. Yeah. The blood pressure machine was broken. I thought, well, this is what happens when you leave doctors without any supervision, without any regulation, without any CPD, without any oversight. I mean, you're a country doctor, you're the only one there, and you let the standards slip. I mean, after all, come on, you can't do medicine without an ophthalmoscope and a sphygmomanometer and a couch. And at the same time as being a general practitioner, I had to look after the local hospital. So it's so remote that you communicated with the consultants by radio. And there was an Australian Aboriginal population there. So it's amazing how many experiences I've had where I've been able to compare the socioeconomically deprived with those who are less socioeconomically deprived. Yes. And I saw how they lived and how they were segregated and everything. So I had learned in my travels as well. So they weren't just purely touristy. We're also gaining insights and clinical experience as well.
And you've got the lived experience of the same sort of thing in Glasgow, I suppose.
Yes,
that they still have there.
Very, very much so. My brother had it with jazz. He became a GP in Postle Park where he worked for 5 years, and he and I did some research there in the early 1980s, and I learned quite a lot about his patients and the kind of living circumstances.
So you're back in Glasgow now. To remind you, you've gone back to Glasgow, you've got a lecturer's post.
I was a registrar of public health, and the first thing I had to do was get my master's in public health at the University of Glasgow. That was part of your training. In your first year, you spend time in the health board. You already started your training. In the Christmas holidays, you have to work. You had to work before you started the course, and then in the Easter holidays you have to work, and in the summer holidays you have to work if you're not doing your course. So very intensive, very hard work, and probably this is when I started to take life, not seriously is not the right word, but with passion. Mm-hmm. With total passion and commitment. So whereas at medical school my objective was to get through my exams and have a good time as well. Now it was a case of I wanted to sap up the knowledge. I wanted it. I was very thirsty for that knowledge and understanding, and especially epidemiology, which I loved straight away. But even the subjects I didn't love, like statistics or computing, I wanted to have the skills under my belt. So now I'm working hard. And of course, got my exams and delighted to get the class prize. And then I'm feeling like a public health doctor. And I'm going to the committees at the health board and contributing. The AIDS pandemic had started. I remember the discussions about AIDS in those days. I mean, it's incredible to think about it. We were discussing in committee meetings as to whether we should be advising people not to get their hair cut in case they get a nick in their skin, or whether it could be transmitted through the air. I mean, knowledge was very limited. I remember one of the key theories at that time was these poppers, that part of the drugs that people took. So I was there, saw it from the beginning, saw the paper that came out from CDC and read it. There are 4 cases or so with Kaposi's sarcoma.
Yes.
So it's exciting times.
It's interesting. When did the faculty of it was called community medicine?
Yes.
start? When was that?
From memory, it was 72 in England and 74 in Scotland.
Yes, and you're talking now when you enter public health in
83.
83, so it's been going about almost a decade.
Yeah.
When it started, there was a sort of move very much towards administration of the health service in public health, which sounded deadly dull. But I got the impression, maybe I'm wrong, that public health had lost some of that old adventurous finding out about the causes of disease and preventing the spread of disease, and were more about running a health service. Is that
I think it's true to say, yes.
A lot of public health in those days was spent doing jobs like superintendent of a hospital, like a medical director's job, or it was chief administrative medical officer, which is like a director of public health job. But there were many facets to public health even then. I mean, we were public health in Glasgow at that time because, as I said, I had to do service. It wasn't just a case of just go to the university and we'll see you in a year. No, you go to the university, when the university is not on, you come here. You're working, you're serving in the committees, you're going, learning. And the AIDS pandemic was one. Environmental pollution was another. Infectious disease outbreaks, we were involved with all them. And then, I can't remember that it started as soon as that, but maybe a few years later, the Good Hearted Glasgow Heart Disease Prevention Programme. I was involved in all those things, information systems. I did some hospital administration as well. One of the jobs I was given to do was the waiting list for orthopedic surgery has gone from 7 weeks to 14 weeks and rising, and we need to know why. And it sent me to do the detective work, which I discovered. It was because one orthopedic consultant has decided he was just going to specialise in feet, and he wasn't going to do anything else.
I was an orthopedic house surgeon with a 3-year waiting list when I got the job.
Right. So I said to him, why is this? And he said, well, that's my specialty, that's what I do best. So I spoke to the chief of the section and said, but he's only doing feet, and the waiting list has risen. You're the boss. I didn't use those words, but what you're going to do? And he said, there's nothing I can do. He's a consultant, and we don't control each other's work. And so I reported back. So I did do those jobs, and I also acted as a locum medical superintendent in one of the Glasgow hospitals the Southern General as it happens. And so I learned the many facets of public health even then. But I had decided to really become an epidemiologist fairly soon because that became my passion.
Yeah.
And when I completed my degree, I was given the privilege of being paid, plus having your fees paid, and we were given, because we had to sit MFPHM Part 1, the MFCM exam, very soon after we sat our MPH exams, we were given an extra 3 months to finish our dissertation, so I had 15 months of education. And at the end of it, it was January 1985, and Tony Headley was a professor. He said, Raj, I've spoken to Dr. Forwell, the Chief Administrative Medical Officer of Greater Glasgow Health Board. We both agreed that you should just stay here in the academic department for the moment. He said, we have some jobs coming up and we'd like you to think about them. So, well, I was delighted. I'm an egghead anyway. I had become an egghead, and from that base, I was still very much connected into the health board and the practical work. So I was learning plenty of practical things, but now I could just stay in the academic department, and I got involved in more teaching. And the first job that came up was a senior lectureship. And Tony Headley said, I want you to apply for this. And I said, that's absurd. How can I apply for a senior lectureship? And I've just completed my MPH a few months ago. And he said, well, apply for it anyway. So I applied, and the committee said, understandably, they said, we can see the potential, but absolutely no way can he be appointed to a senior lectureship. If he would be willing to take a lectureship, and we can see that that's a fit. Mm-hmm. So I was appointed as lecturer. Right. And Tony Headley said to me, you're appointed as a lecturer, but I'm expecting you to behave and act like a senior lecturer. The responsibilities you'll get will be those of a senior lecturer. He said, do you understand that? I didn't really know what he meant, so I just took the job. The job was started on the 1st of May 1985, and my first son was born at 4 a.m. on the 1st of May 1985. So instead of arriving for work at 9, he was born at 4 a.m. I went to sleep at 7 a.m. and I couldn't get to work for 9 a.m. I managed to get to work at 10 a.m. So I went into the Prof. Secretary's office and I said, I'm late, but my son was born at 4 a.m. this morning. And she said, well, you go to your office. I had an office. And I'll tell Prof. And he came along, maybe about 11 o'clock. He said, congratulations. He said, you better go home at 4 p.m. today. So I went home at 4 p.m. and there was no question of not coming into work next day. No, absolutely no question. Just
those were the days.
Those were the days, and annual leave had to be booked in advance. You can't just say, I'm going to take the next 2 weeks as annual leave. There was work to be done. Within a couple of weeks, he said, you're now the director of the MPH. So I became director of the MPH. So then I had to oversee all the teachers teaching that course and do a lot of the teaching myself. So then I learned what he meant when he said, you'll be appointed as a lecturer, but you act like a senior lecturer.
Get the pay of a lecturer.
And so I took on pretty heavy responsibilities in that job. I was also beginning to raise a family, but I loved it. It was my subject.
Yes.
I loved it and immersed myself in it. And in my teaching, I taught virtually the whole module on epidemiology, and as a result I learned my epidemiology so thoroughly. I thought I knew it before, but now I was really understanding epidemiology because I was having to teach it. I also taught many other subjects. By the end of the year I was exhausted, and I had my second experience of feedback. Tony was always very supportive. He was a mentor, and he didn't see a lot of me, but when he did, the advice was always very good. It would just be half an hour, maybe every 3 months or something. At Christmas, he said to me, "Where were you?" He called me into his office, and I said, "I took a holiday. I was very tired." And he said, "But I needed you." I said, "But I did let your secretary know that I was going." He said, "But next time you want a holiday, you ask me directly. Don't go through my secretary." I said, "But I was very tired and I needed a break." He said, "If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen." And I thought, here's my greatest supporter giving me this feedback. He's now the late Tony Headley, one of the people I respect more than anyone else I've ever met in my life. And I know he's such a hard worker, so committed that. Yeah, again, it was a bit a David Glenley moment. You could either take it badly or you can take it well. And I took it well in the sense that once I got over the shock, I realised that actually life just gets harder and harder. You often hear people say, "Well, I can't wait to get my consultant job because this senior registrar job is so hard, or my registrar job is so hard, or my SHO job is so hard, my houseman job is so hard." No, I learned that actually it just gets harder and harder and harder. More and more expectations, more and more responsibilities, more and more wishes and drives. And yes, I had worked hard in 1985, but it wasn't the hardest I was ever going to work. No way.
Yes.
And so I just knuckled down and said, "Okay." He said to me, "I'm going to have to work like a senior lecturer," and I did. And then the years went on, and in 1988 I had to go for my first consultant job. I was more or less finished my training. It's 5-year training, very close to training. I want to stay on the academic track. And Tony Headley was leaving Glasgow University to go to Hong Kong University. He didn't tell me that, but I went to see him and I said, "There's a job in Newcastle, and should I go for it?" He said, "Definitely go for it. That's your next step."
Right. So you're in Newcastle now. What happened there?
Well, I think Newcastle is where I started to take my research seriously. Up till then, I had been doing some, and I'd done my MD on the epidemiology of Legionnaire's disease in Scotland, and I had become embroiled in epidemiological and similar projects, but I was never responsible in a serious way for any funded research until I got to Newcastle.
Yes.
And in Newcastle, I was not a consultant, so jobs were coming my way, whether they were coming from the district health authority, from the other health authorities, from the regional health authority, or whether they were developed by myself and my colleagues and my teams. So barrage of opportunities, and suddenly I was in charge of a number of projects where we had to design the study. If funding was required, to get the funding, win the funding, and then execute the study. So I did quite a lot of work on AIDS education for young people, including the evaluation of these AIDS education programs. That was for the Regional Health Authority. And I was finishing off my MD as well at the same time and writing the papers from it. But the first really challenging project that I did was the Moncton Cooking Works study, where for 50 years or so the public had been complaining about the smoke, dust and fumes coming from a coking works, which was very adjacent to a housing estate. The coking works said, "Well, we were here long before the housing estate. It's not our problem." The people who lived in the housing said, "Well, the local authority has housed us here, and we're being exposed to this, and it's very damaging to our health." So we were asked to evaluate whether the people were correct or not. So very, very complicated project. You'll know this, Anthony. It's your field, really. How are we going to demonstrate whether these fumes, 100 yards away, from the closest houses, maybe 50 to 100 yards away. Sometimes the wind would drive the fumes into the direction of the homes. And the people are complaining of chronic bronchitis and coughs and colds and lung cancer and all sorts of other things. So we set up a project where we gathered a wide range of data from self-completed questionnaires, morbidity and mortality statistics, and even lung function tests, where we asked people to come and do the lung function tests with the people who live close to the coking works as the study group, and then an intermediate distance as a semi-controlled group, and another group of people quite a bit further away where you couldn't claim that the mountain coking works had anything to do with it. It is an incredibly controversial project because there was litigation going on. And there was an action group, a citizens action group, and the local authorities involved and the industries involved, and learned all about the politics of research. And after 2 years, we were able to produce a pretty definitive account of the health status of the population. And we showed that actually the health was poor, but no poorer than people who live further away. There was no clear association between proximity to the coking works and the risk of, say, chronic bronchitis, lung cancer. What we showed was that there were some small differences, like the rate of consultation with a GP for respiratory disorders, but it was a great disappointment to the Citizens Action Group, but a fantastic learning opportunity for a young up-and-coming senior lecturer epidemiologist.
Did you have the job of presenting the results to the community?
Yes, of course.
How
I
did
was a principal investigator. It was a stunned silence.
Mm.
But we had become very well respected because we had come to know the people, they had come to know us. We had taken them with us and said what we were going to do, how we were going to do it. Even we knew the industry bosses, they knew how we were working, what our plans were. We did that big study, and then we did an even bigger one on a grand scale, the Teesside environmental epidemiology study, which is about the petrochemicals complex in Teesside. 100 years of controversy. Even bigger project, vast amounts of data collected, and many pronged approach to trying to solve the problem. And we did there show that lung cancer rates in women who lived near these petrochemical complexes were quite substantially raised compared with people who did not live near them. There's a clear gradient with distance. And there wasn't with virtually any other condition. And maybe some respiratory conditions, a bit more common in people who live near the complexes. That was very controversial. It was a £10 billion industry at that time, in the early 90s. There. So vast consequences of that kind of research. So, but we had toughened up and learned how to handle the various parties. So this is the kind of project I was suddenly in principal investigator of and responsible for. At the same time, we were running the Newcastle Heart Project, which is a study of cardiovascular and diabetes risk factors in Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Chinese, and white British populations in Newcastle. Another very complex and difficult project, given all these different ethnic groups and the languages involved and the cultures involved. And we actually got them to come into hospital and did an oral glucose tolerance test, as well as all the other things that you might expect.
This was your first attempt to study ethnicity?
No, I had been studying ethnicity even while I was in Glasgow from 1984. I had become interested in that.
Right.
I was always a person that had many balls in the air,
yes.
Not one project. It wasn't really, I never had one area of research. I had many. So at the same time as we're doing the environmental epidemiology studies, I'm doing the Newcastle Heart Project. And at the same time, very shortly afterwards, another professor of medicine and I got involved in the epidemiology of primary biliary cirrhosis in the north of England. He said we have the highest rates of primary biliary cirrhosis in the world. And I said, that's because you're here And that's your specialist area.
Yeah.
He said, what do you
Yeah.
mean? I said, well, the more you test for something, the higher the incidence.
Mm.
So we started a series of studies on that. So I was working on primary biliary cirrhosis, ethnicity and health, environmental epidemiology, many practical projects, AIDS education, other kinds of health board type projects, ophthalmological accidents, emergencies. Virtually everything I did was being published. So I always took my service work as also an opportunity to do proper research and publish it. I sometimes had to do bog standard service work, which had no academic component like every other consultant. But mostly I engineered things so that I was given the jobs where there was a research component. So I did a lot of service work, a lot of work for the service. I became non-executive director of the Newcastle Health Authority and then vice chairman for 2 years of the Newcastle Health Authority. I then worked for the Health Education Authority of England as a non-executive director for 3 years. And I was becoming just a busy consultant, and suddenly learning what it really means to be busy, as opposed to thinking you're busy. And what you said then when we had a little interlude, the sense of responsibility, the buck stops here.
That's right. Yes. Yes. The beauty of epidemiology is that you can have interest in all sorts of different things. Whereas I suppose most academic researchers have one thing that they pursue throughout a lifetime. And I often thought that makes public health type academic work much more interesting than the general clinical type of research that gets done.
That's true what you're saying, and it also has its limitations, because if I had been able to discover the true underlying cause of primary biliary cirrhosis, had been world famous, I might have had a Nobel Prize. But when primary biliary cirrhosis is one of half a dozen major projects, then you're not going to be able to do that level of detailed work. Of course, you have to get lucky too. You can spend a lifetime studying the epidemiology of primary biliary cirrhosis and never discover the cause. But if I did, so I, especially at that time of my life, I was in my 30s and vast amounts of energy, even although by then I had 3 children. I don't know where that energy came from, but I did, and nothing was ever too much, and always looking for something interesting to do. And papers, of course, so I had to publish the papers, and learning how difficult it is to even get one publication, never mind a string of publications. But it was all working. And then suddenly, in the midst of all this, the inaugural chair of epidemiology and public health was advertised in Newcastle, and the dean and the regional medical officer, Liam Donaldson, said to me, "We'd like you to apply." And I'd only been in Newcastle for about 2.5 years at this time as a senior lecturer, and I couldn't understand why they were wanting me to apply, but they did want me to apply. And I applied, and I was only 37 years of age, and lo and behold, I was suddenly holding the first chair. And then a few months later, at my request, I have to admit, I was appointed head of department. So now I was busy with lots of headaches.
Yes. Did you have the backing of a few senior lecturers, or were you on your own?
I was on my own.
On your
I was the
own,
new
yes.
boy
Yes.
who, as far as they were concerned, had hardly even cut his teeth.
There was a department of occupational medicine in Newcastle.
Yes.
That was quite famous. Ian McCallum had he retired by then?
Yes, Peter Blaine was the
Peter Blaine.
president. We worked together. We were
Yes.
we were close. Peter Blaine was involved in these environmental epidemiology studies I've told you about. We had a medical statistics department.
Yes.
Our department of community medicine had been as part of the family medicine department under John Walker, and now we were split into a different section, and I was professor and head of the new section. So now for the first time in my life I've learned what hard work really meant. Managing a department, trying to grow the department. It was a very small department, but in the few years I was professor and head, we went from about 7-8 people to about 40 people. And in that 3-4 year period, 5-year period, I was in, every appointment was done in the personnel office. I was in the personnel office about 40 times, appointing people. So that was really hard work, Anthony. And but you get through it somehow.
It speaks for the great success in grant applications, which take a huge amount of work.
Well, I was never great at grant applications. I was great at projects. So if there was a problem to be solved and there was a project to be done, I was great at saying I can do it and I can solve it.
Yeah.
But grant applications, I had never had that opportunity to learn how to do it. In Glasgow, I was very busy. I had got some small-scale grants. In Newcastle, I was fortunate. I worked with the Professor of Medicine, George Alberti, and then Oliver James. Grants, they would often lead the grant application. My grants were often applied epidemiology, the Teesside environmental study, or the Mountain Coking Works, where I would write the protocol and the grant would be organised and agreed with the health authority or the regional health authority. Grant writing was never my forte until I came to Edinburgh, when I had to learn how to do it properly. And there was so much work to be done and so many opportunities that you really didn't have to write the grants.
Right.
They would somehow, it wasn't one of these proactive things where you're going out to the funding agencies. To some extent, the authorities had a lot of money for that kind of work to solve their problems, and they would come to me and say, what can you do for us? And I'd say, well, we can do this, and this is how much it'll cost, and we'd work out the grant.
Yes. Right.
So it's a slightly different applied researcher. Most of our funding as a department came from the health service, so therefore we were beholden to them. We had to listen to them. When they needed us, we had to be there. So we solved a lot of problems for them. Mm-hmm. They had problems, we were the problem solvers, and that's why we were given the funding. So that was a learning experience being in Newcastle, where I was there from 1988 till 1999. And then by 1996, with all that hard work, as you can imagine, I was getting a bit worn out. And I asked for a sabbatical, which was given to me a year, and I went to North America, Chapel Hill, and I was asked why I wanted a sabbatical. I said I want to write a book. And I said I want to write a book on epidemiology. And well, in the States, as well as learning how public health and epidemiology is done there, meeting a lot of new people, I drafted out my book, Concepts of Epidemiology, which is based upon the way I had been teaching the subject for quite a number of years. Yes. My own ideas on what the subject is about and how to teach it.
I was going to ask you about that because sometimes you write a book in your extra time, in other words, early mornings, but you actually had a sabbatical.
Had a sabbatical, so I would, when I came back from the sabbatical a year later, as well as having visited lots of service departments and academic departments and met lots of people and written a few papers from the research that was going on in Newcastle, I had drafted out virtually the whole draft of the book in longhand. So I came back with a manuscript, and of course first draft is only the beginning, but it's great to have it, and then you can finish it. And then I came back, and I was unsettled. Newcastle was a very small place compared with Chapel Hill School of Public Health and And the department I was
Yes,
in, the Department of Epidemiology had 28 academics in it, never mind all the support staff. And they only did epidemiology, they did nothing else.
Yeah.
Whereas we were doing the full range of public health, as well as, and we did undergraduate teaching, postgraduate teaching, PhDs. They didn't do any undergraduate education. And we were supposed to compete with them. And I felt unsettled. And things had changed in Newcastle as well, and it was time for a change for me. So when Edinburgh was looking for a new chair, Mike Garraway had retired, I bumped into Jerry Fowkes at a conference, and he said, our chair is free. I said, I'll call you. I called him a week later, and I said, well, we have someone that would fill that chair here in Newcastle. I then named a colleague, and he said, Raj, I was hoping that maybe you might be interested. I said, well, I'm settled here. I've got 4 children, and we're settled. They're all at school. He said, well, have a think about it. Well, anyway, history records that I did have a think about it. And I thought, well, actually, Newcastle's Edinburgh's a bigger scene. It's a university where I was educated, and it's a great city to live in. It'd be good for the children. So we uprooted and came to Edinburgh. My 2 oldest sons were crying openly the day I told them we were leaving. So it's very emotional to leave Newcastle. About 13.
Yes.
13 and 11. And I said, it'll be good for you. And it did work out good. So I arrived in 1999, settled in, completely different culture. It's a big department, but like a monastery. Everyone's very industrious. They come into their office, they work in their office, they leave the office having achieved something, and very little interaction. It wasn't quite the place. It wasn't like Chapel Hill. In Chapel Hill, it's a modern building. People interacted, and I found it a bit difficult, but eventually I tried to change the culture. I was the John Bruce Usher, Alexander Bruce and John Usher Professor of Public Health, therefore I had a leadership role. And I exerted that leadership role, and I tried to change the culture, but usually culture of organisations changes the individual. The culture of organisations is usually very long, historical, inbuilt, very hard to change it. So eventually I became that very industrious person who came in and got on with the work and left, and although I was probably somewhere in between. I then, for the first time, became, I think, a proper scholar and researcher. So it's already my second chair. I was given space and time, and there was a high expectation. And I realised that I couldn't go on having half a dozen research areas. It wasn't feasible. So I then chose to specialise in ethnicity, race and health.
Yes, this coincided with the changes in the universities, I think, didn't it, when everything depended on getting international reputations. So something like that, which is broad and is transportable across continents, would have been ideal, I suppose.
It was for me. I had decided to do that even before I came here.
Maybe I remember actually when you went to Newcastle, I think, because I followed your career a little bit just out of curiosity, and you did get a reputation for work on ethnicity, possibly migration.
No, I did, yes, through the Newcastle Heart Project, especially, which is still heavily cited, and no, I think
I was lucky in the sense that I had a choice. I have always had a choice. I could have specialised in Legionnaire's disease, published a lot. already had a reputation on Legionnaire's disease in the 1980s. Or I could have gone into environmental epidemiology, and certainly the ethnicity and health side, or I could have just been a straight down the line cardiovascular epidemiologist. I always had a good choice of things to choose from. I was successfully publishing on a range of things, but I chose to do ethnicity. And at the interview I was asked how was I going to manage to work on ethnicity in a relatively mono-ethnic society like Edinburgh, and why would I not want to go to a place like Birmingham or something like that. So it was a good question which I managed to answer. And I said, actually, there's plenty of opportunities, and as I've shown in Newcastle, which is a similar ethnic mix to Edinburgh, and I think I can succeed. And so anyway, again, history records I was appointed, and I learned that there were plenty of challenges in terms of university's aspirations for us, the way we were organised, how we were working, and the university had hopes and plans which were not being fulfilled. And when I got there, they had said to me, you won't have to do any administration for 3 years minimum. And I said, that suits me because I need to lay my research roots. But within 6 months, I was collared. And could you take on the headship of Community Health Sciences, which is a new organisation combining general practice, public health, and the research unit on health and behaviour change. Well, you can't really say no when you're asked to do that by dean. So I said, I thought I was going to have 3 years, but they said, well, we need this done. We need these 3 units being brought together. And I knew I was the kind of person who could do it, because
you lost your rebellious streak by then, didn't you? You say you couldn't possibly say no. I know of a number of people who would have been very happy to say no.
No, I don't think I could have, not as a new boy.
No.
No. And
no. And also when people say we think you can do it, in a sense I knew I could do it, because you're new, so to some extent you don't have the history of other people. It's also a challenge, and having been there for some months, I could even see myself that things had to change. We were a large number of people collectively, but working individually. And so I had a go, and we developed Community Health Sciences, and we turned it into a real organisation. It had been a paper organisation for a number of years, and we turned and changed it to a real organisation. Now we have the Asher Institute with like a school of public health, a massive organisation. So we'd gone from a different way of thinking and working. So I had a go at it and did my best, but I was still intent on keeping my work as a true blue scholar and researcher going. And so having finished my book and published it in 2002, I then wrote grants and developed in a sort of more theoretical way what I wanted to do, as well as what needed to be done. Not relying upon problems coming my way, more identifying the problems and saying, well, we're going to solve them. So I was involved in a lot of research, different big projects. Some were led by others, even though I played a big part of them, like the Born in Bradford study. But the 2 big projects that I led on and developed in my time in Edinburgh, and I'm probably proudest of, are the Scottish Health and Ethnicity Linkage Study, where we linked the Scottish Census 2001 to an amazingly broad array of health and other kinds of data in what is really a unique global project. I mean, they do it in Scandinavia, but they don't do it on the census, they do it on a register.
Yes.
And it's completely different when you don't have a unique number for each citizen. And they do it in New Zealand, but they've not been able to go beyond the census office. So the census office links to its own databases. We link to databases, including the Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland, which contains compulsory admission to mental hospitals in Scotland, which is probably the most sensitive data you could possibly think of.
Yeah.
We linked the census to that, amongst general practice records, breast cancer screening records, bowel cancer screening records, cancer registration, hospitalizations, mortality. It is almost unparalleled, even now. We started that in 2002, and I was responsible for 4 rounds of grants. So that's one of my proudest achievements, really. And the other big project that I led was the prevention of diabetes and obesity in South Asians. So I've been studying that topic. I knew a lot about it. But at some point you think studying something just isn't enough. We've got to do something about it.
Yes.
And we didn't know what to do about it. We didn't know what would work. We knew Jaakko Tuomo-Leto and colleagues from Finland were beginning to show, and they had published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that lifestyle interventions can slow down the progression of impaired glucose tolerance to type 2 diabetes. So will it do it in South Asian populations? Well, no one really knew. There had been a study in India where they didn't manage to get any weight off the people. They did say they got the incidence lower, maybe through physical activity. That was the only study. No study outside India on South Asians. So we started one.
Do the risk factors differ in South Asians to other ethnic groups?
Probably
You
not.
want to be able to answer.
No, I've written a book on the topic, but I still can't answer it easily. It's a very complicated question, very complicated answer as well. Probably much the same, but South Asians get type 2 diabetes at much lower BMIs than white Europeans do.
So someone like myself would start to get a risk of impaired glucose tolerance once my BMI exceeds 21.
Yes.
Whereas in a white European, we might expect that risk to start increasing around about a BMI of 24, 25. So it is the same issue, fat, but at a different level. So fat's a very complicated organ. It's just nothing like what people think it is.
Yes.
Very complex organ. So we set up this trial to see if we could prevent the progression from impaired glucose tolerance to diabetes in South Asian, Indian and Pakistani populations living in Glasgow and Edinburgh. No such trial had ever been conducted outside India. And we succeeded in doing the trial, but it's very difficult. We couldn't get the right numbers of people despite enormous efforts. But anyway, we got the trial done, it's published. Sorry? A dietitian would go in and work with the family to change their eating habits, to try and get them to reduce weight. And we found people with impaired glucose tolerance or impaired fasting glucose. And the aim of the trial was to see if we can stop them going on to develop type 2 diabetes. We had to settle for an interim goal of reducing weight by 2.5 kilograms. We couldn't get enough people for the medical outcome. We managed to get people to lose 1.8 kilograms. It's a bit disappointing, but in every other trial and study that had ever been done anywhere in the world, they couldn't get any weight off them. So our achievement was not too bad. And now we are part of there's been a meta-analysis done of such trials all over the world. And the meta-analysis is showing that these interventions are promising, but they need further development. So we were early there, and I played a part. So I then got involved in a wide range of research in Edinburgh, mostly around ethnicity and health, but not always. Mostly, obviously, there's student research as well, which I like to let my students do whatever they want. I don't try and pigeonhole them. I never give them a protocol and say, oh, can you chip off this bit of work that I've been wanting to do? They always have to do something that they want to do. So yeah, so that's my life in Edinburgh was a busy one, but it was a scholarly one for the first time, because when I stopped being head of community health sciences in 2003, I decided that was enough administration kind of work for me. And what if I was going to do administration, I was going to do different kinds of administration. So I took on the World Congress of Epidemiology, the 19th World Congress in 2011, and I took that was the 19th Congress. And I also, just before my retirement, was the leader of the first World Congress on Migration, Ethnicity, Race and Health, which is now, we've now set up a global society on migration, ethnicity, race and health. So I had in that period, from 1999 to my retirement in 2018, I had specialised in that topic of ethnicity, race and health. And in that period I had also written 2 editions of a new textbook with that title, Migration, Ethnicity, Race and Health in Multicultural Societies. And within that topic, I had become increasingly focused on cardiovascular diseases and type 2 diabetes. And then on the day of my retirement, I submitted a manuscript on the epidemic of cardiovascular diseases and diabetes in South Asians worldwide, explanations. So the manuscript went off at midday, and I cleared my office till 9 o'clock that night. And then that was the end of my career in that post. And looking back on that 19-year period, it was an incredible period of time. And I think I left Edinburgh, well, I left my job, and now emeritus professor, a proper scholar and researcher, having come as someone maybe with that potential to be such a person. I was a practitioner before, as a public health practitioner. I mean, you know, you introduced me as CBE. I mean, I got my CBE in 2001. It's quite early. I was quite young. It's for services to public health. And I did give a lot of service to public health, and not through research, but through service, whether it was non-executive director or committee work, or supporting individuals, mentoring, teaching, training, but mostly I think through supporting organisations and committees. And that kind of work, although I continue to do it in Edinburgh, I did it in association with my research. So Scottish Government, Health Education Board for Scotland, NHS Lothian Board, they all knew that I was very interested in inequalities in health, and in particular by ethnicity. Therefore, they always had something that needed to be done, whether it's ISD, and they would call on me because they knew that. And I was very glad to do it, because then I had to fulfill my NHS contract. So I always took that contract very seriously, and to be able to fulfill it by working on your areas of scholarship and research is a wonderful way to do that side of your job.
And the CBE should be given for that sort of thing, frankly. Not for winning medals at Olympic Games, but for all that hard work that people do voluntarily for the public good. But how do you feel about being a commander of the Honourable Order of the British Empire, when the British Empire really no longer exists? Did you have any sort of qualms about that at the time?
Yes, of course. I have read a lot on the British Raj.
Yes.
And the horrors of the British Raj, which I think most people don't know about.
And naturally, that's not a part of Britain and British history that I can feel proud of. And an honour which has got that title is not very comfortable for me. But I never for 1 minute thought of turning it down.
No.
Because it is a great honour, and it's a reflection of what people around you think. It came as a complete surprise to me. Most people do say it's a complete surprise. It's far too early. When I came to Scotland, people were really surprised, and they thought it was far too early for me because I'd only been
Perhaps a
in.
little envious.
And it's not for me to say, but I was informed that they had thought it was too early, because I think the Scottish Government had been consulted about me being put forward for the SONA, and clearly I was put forward because of my work while I was in Newcastle and England, not for my work while I was in Scotland. Anyway, I'm glad to have it despite all the problems. I do believe there is work to be done in relation to the British Empire and how it's perceived, and what good it did and what harm it did. History will do that work, and maybe we'll all have a better understanding. My daughter-in-law is English, a white British woman, and we were having a discussion a couple of weeks ago. And I said to her, well, the British Empire is a complex thing. There were some good things about it and some bad things about it. And she said, you name one good thing. And I was a bit stumped. It's not easy. But I still stuck to my guns. And I said, there are some good things about it, you know, and...
Three good things. I mean, in India, I
was told by Indian friends there are three good things that Britain gave India. You could argue about them. The language, the language of the administrative class, I suppose, the railways for communications, and what was the third thing? Language. There was a third thing. What would it have been? Can you think of it?
Well, no, I think one of the things I've learned over the years is that the Indians have a great deal of affection for the British, and also for the British Empire. And I've heard so many people extolling the virtues of the British, older people saying India was better when the British were here. My own uncle is now 95. He's the person who sponsored our family to come. He was the one who took us from London to Glasgow in 1955. He said to me, he was given a secondary education in a British school in India, and he wouldn't have had it if it wasn't for the British. So there's a lot of very kind things that people will say about the British. And I mean, I've heard a lot of praise from people, but of course that's anecdotal. Whereas if we wanted to do a proper analysis of the pros and cons, that would be a different challenge which needs to be done at some point. And some people have pointed out the pros, and some people have pointed out the cons. And the one book you may have read, I think his name is Thakur, he says the Indians are owed $20 trillion by the British for what they took out of the country. If reparations are to be paid,
will be lucky.
So, you know, okay, that's one side of the argument, and the other
yes.
side, how do you weigh up all the benefits as well? I mean, it's a very complicated matter, but to return to the issue which we're discussing, which we may be discussing off the record, but the honour is still an honour, and the honour is just not, as everyone says, it's not just for you and your work, it's also for your organisation and for your colleagues and your teachers, and your family, who've all supported you and contributed. If I was working entirely on my own, I would have achieved virtually nothing. It's the fact that I've been able to work with so many amazing people. And in fact, I've just been to the retired do of Professor Suzanne Moffat. She was the research associate I appointed to do the Moncton Cloaking Work study. And at her retiral, I was able to say why this study succeeded, because of her personal attributes, her own ability to make complicated things happen successfully. And then she also took on the Teesside study as the senior research associate there. And that was a success too. So as the principal investigator, I get a lot of the credit, but I know who really deserves it. And when you get these honours, you have to say, well,
Yes.
a lot of other people have contributed to that.
Well, now you've retired with many awards and an international reputation. Are you just going to play chess for Scotland and walk in the mountains? Or I don't believe you are going to do that. You're going to be busy.
Yes, very busy. In fact, this morning I spent another hour and a bit clearing out my office. I don't have an office, but there's cupboards full of my stuff. And the usher is moving to a new building in 2024, and I've been told it's time to move my stuff on, either take it home or get rid of it. So I've been going through all these stuff in the archives room and in these cupboards, and so I'm still busy with that. And of course, when I retired, I decided I would continue to work 1 day a week, full day, until I lost all my energy. That might mean as long as I live, with a bit of luck. And then, of course, just as I was getting into the rhythm, because when you first retire, there's loads of papers that are unpublished, that are half drafted, etc. And lots of students who are not quite finished. And so you can't just go from working to not working. Too many people would be let down, there'd be too much unfinished business. And so I decided, so I was just getting down to about 1 day a week, which is what my plan was. I'd get up on a Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock, I'd be at my desk, somewhere between 5 and 6, so I'd stop work until next Wednesday. And then the pandemic struck. And although no one formally asked me, I did volunteer to the Scottish Government and to NHS Lothian. There was no call for my services, but I couldn't sit back, so I put myself back onto my desk and worked 6 days a week for quite a long time, and then I came to my senses and slowly reduced it until last year, until 2021. So it was a full year of very hard work on the pandemic, and then my eyesight was deteriorating badly, so I had to just stop. And then now my eyesight's a bit better than it was last year, and I'm slowly doing a bit again. So I'm going off to give a lecture in New Jersey. I'm a keynote speaker, which I'm quite looking forward to. It will force me back to the literature and the books, so I can deliver this keynote properly. And then I wrote something for the BMJ. I was always an avid writer for the BMJ, usually for the correspondence column, so I've submitted something to them, not on COVID. I did a lot on COVID. For the moment, I've had enough of COVID. I'm trying to get back to other things. So I'm hoping that maybe my original idea of doing 1 day a week, I might try and return to that. And if I can keep it going, I'll be very happy. I mean, I do read my BMJ and every week, and I try and keep myself informed and alert. And that still gives me enough time for my chess and my books and my music and the golf and the walking and everything else. But I think if you're emeritus professor, then it's an opportunity as well as an obligation to actually try and do something. And some of the people I've admired very greatly, people like Professor John Last, who recently died, he worked into his 90s. And I think he was a widower as well for a long time, and it keeps you sane as well as involved.
Good. Well, I think on that note, I think it's time to draw this to a close. Thank you very much indeed for telling us a little bit about a very, very busy and interesting and varied life. Thanks,
Well, thank
Professor Raj Bohpal.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been a true pleasure. And it is an honor to be asked to speak to you on this and to have it recorded for my college.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.